Good afternoon, everybody. It's 4:15 on Tuesday, April 18th, and we will call this special City Commission budget work session to order. If we could have a roll call, please.
Mayor Gary,
Here.
Commissioner Bauer, Commissioner Baspis Rath,
Here.
Commissioner Habusta,
Here.
Commissioner Marble,
Here.
Commissioner Miller, Commissioner Rubenstein.
Commissioner Bauer, Commissioner Miller both did tell us they wouldn't make it tonight, so we would need a motion to excuse.
Motion to excuse Commissioner Miller and Commissioner Bauer.
Support.
Been moved and supported. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. If everybody could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, everybody. Moving on, mayor comments and general announcements. I'll skip, but I will do some brief announcements. Moving into item B, which is special orders of business. Did you want to open it, or do you want me to open it? Okay. So last night, the city administration and staff have worked for 6 months probably on the budget process. I know a couple of you are new, so this will be a good experience to go through it. Last night, the budget was presented to us, and all we did was accept it. Tonight, we will go through it line by line, inch by inch, and they'll go through the different columns. You can see that there are department head requests, and there are, I don't have it open, but the different, you guys will go through that part, right? Okay. So tonight's process is for the administration to review the budget that is proposed, and they will go through every revenue, every expense, and review them and let us know if there are any significant changes. And tonight, our only objective is, and the rules are tonight, that this is the hit and wish time. So we are not going to talk about items. We are not going to get into great depth of any of the budget items. But if you have something that you would like to add to the budget in that particular area, you would put a wish. Kristen, or I don't know who's doing it, Robin or Kristen? Or Callie. So Callie will put it on a spreadsheet. If you have something that you have a concern with, then you would put a hit on that item. And so at the end of the night, we'll have a matrix of all our hits and wishes, and then administration will, for the next 2 days, crunch numbers like crazy, and by Friday, we will have a report of the revised suggested budget with all of the items that we have put in, adding or subtracting, and what their impact will be. And then at next Monday's meeting, then if we asked for that item, we'll have an opportunity to try to sell it to the rest of the commission and add it into the budget. So tonight is not a deliberation on our items. Tonight is just hit, wish, and move on. We've got a couple hundred pages to get through, so this is a pretty fast process. So any questions on that at all? Correct? Anything else?
When you, at near the end, we'll go over the hit and wish to make sure we caught them all.
Yep. This is a time-tested process, I think 3-4 city managers ago, and then we've used it for a long, long time before I was around, so. So it works really well, so. All right, so we will turn it over to city manager, to turn it over to deputy city manager, to turn it over to.
Nope, I don't have much to say tonight because I was out of the office with COVID and my appendicitis. So Director Collins and Deputy Manager Troyer led the budget process, so I'm gonna let them lead this stuff tonight. So turn it over to you guys.
All right, thank you.
And I
So,
forgot to mention, if you need to get up and go to the bathroom, go. If you need to
Yeah.
get something to eat, go.
Yep.
We'll just keep rolling.
And if you have any questions as we're going through, please, you can ask them for clarification. The budget, we kind of laid out in the agenda packet in the order that we're going to go through, so we're not going to have you flipping back and through pages. So you can follow along. I don't know if you've got the PDF up, it's bookmarked on the side, so you can easily click through the different funds that we're going to touch on. So to kick us off, Kristen is just going to kind of give a brief budget 101, because some are new to the process, just kind of giving an overview of governmental accounting, so use your mic.
I turned it on. On testing. Okay. The city has 33 individual funds, and we did get it down to 86 pages, Don, so it's not 100 plus. We have 12 governmental funds. All of this I just grabbed from our audit. So if you ever want a refresher of this, it's located and proofed by our auditors in our audit. The 5 major governmental funds are the general fund, which is where we will always start, major street, local street, road contingency, and the capital projects fund. There are several others, so that means there are 7 other governmental funds that are non-major. There are 5 enterprise fund which account for business type activities, and 2 of these are major. The sewer and water fund, which we'll go through second, and the parking, the surface parking. But other non-major enterprise funds would include parking structure. It's the 500s. There are 3 internal service funds, and they are used to accumulate and allocate costs internally among the various city functions. Stock and equipment, IT, and healthcare are those 3. There are 8 component unit funds, and those are basically the DDA and the EDC, and their tax captures. The DDA also has a capital projects fund. And then there are 5 trust and fiduciary funds. There's Seal Osborne Trust, there's the Perpetual Care Trust, and then there's the Police and Firefighter Pension and the PEHP, which is short for Public Employee Health Care Plan. Those are in the 700s. Are there any questions on the governmental and related fund structure? Okay, and then I just found a little excerpt about the budgetary basis of accounting, the finance director, and our process. The finance director compiles information from the department. They all enter their requests right on our financial software. It's due at a certain time. We meet, we go through their requests, and that's all on a level. Bonnie, could you pull up my screen? Thank you so much. So I'm going to show you these levels, and first I wanted to show you what Robin mentioned. This is the bookmark, so if you're looking at your own computer and you want to see that, it's, I go over here and I show that, and then I hit the little flag. So we ordered it, here's the general fund, and then I'm going to go down a page. And this is the color coding. I'm going to make that a little larger, and I can make this go away for now too, so that I can get it bigger for you all to see. In these columns, we have the first bright yellow is the projected. This is where we're going to close the year, this current year ending 6/30/23. Year 1 is in orange. The department requested it is in white right before it, so that's what the department's entered, and the orange is a possible where we might have changed the number, we may have cut something. The second white column here that I'm pointing to, the 2024-25, is our budget year 2, and then the green is the manager recommended budget year 2, okay? Along the left side is all the general ledger numbers. So the first 3 numbers are the general fund, that's 101. And as we go through, you'll see the sewer and water fund is 592. And then this department is the second 3 numbers, the 000 means it's revenue. And then these are the account numbers. All the 400s are taxes. So right now, we're all on a state of Michigan chart of accounts. And so all these numbers are conforming with all other municipalities throughout the state. So it does make it helpful for auditors and for comparison purposes. If you work at another governmental agency, I'm sure you'd appreciate it. So that's where we start and then as we go through, I did mention, I was going back to this thing with the auditors prepared. At this meeting, it is all stipulated. The second meeting is when the manager recommends the budget, and then the commission holds a public hearing, and the final budget must be adopted by June 1st. That's our state law. So we have time. We usually schedule it, so if there is any problem or some work session that we need additional, that there's time for that and time for public feedback after the public hearing. Are there any questions on the process we go through? There is one other thing I wanted to cover, if there are none, and that is that the budget level. So budget level for budgetary control is adopted by the governing body at the function level in the general fund. So what I mean by function level is we would have public safety would include police department and fire department. General government would include Robin's department, the manager, the commission, or not the commission, my department. Commission is a separate function, that's the legislative. So there's different functions as we go through, and if there's any questions on that, but when you do finally get the tax resolution, you will see it all broken down by the budget level. That's in the general fund. All the other funds, the commission adopts at a fund level. So what that means is that during the year, if something goes over budget in, say, sewer and water fund, we can transfer between those departments because they're of a similar activity, and therefore you already approved the budget overall, but it can be transferred in and out. I usually come back to the commission 3 times during the year with a budget review so that you can see what's going on, and if there's any requests to transfer between these different categories, then I'll ask for that. Are there any questions on the funds and the structure? Well, let's get going then. So in the general fund, I'm starting on page 3, and it's revenue. And we start with tax revenue, and then we go through grant revenue. And there wasn't a lot of change in these line items. I'm going to scroll down if I can. When we get to page 4, we start in the 101-00600s, and those are for charges for services. So you'll see one big line item is ambulance services. We've budgeted at $1.4 million. There was some back and forth with the fire chief about what we might see this year, and we felt $1.4 million was probably a pretty reasonable estimate at this time. Right below ambulance, you'll see the write-offs. So those are contra revenues. If you see something with a negative in revenue, that's going to be where we write off for Medicare, Medicaid, the part that we don't get. So the net of those 3 is our net revenue for ambulance services. Another large line item, if we scroll down, I'm looking. Okay, I'm trying to find Oni Osborne because that's a pretty big one. Right at the bottom of the page, I have $300,000 and $375,000 in the budget year 1 for revenue there. Other activities we have are the marinas. We have the Puller at $1.010 million with the budget. This year we're expecting it to close at $1 million. I'm sorry, not $1 million, $110,000. This year we're expecting it to close at $115,000. But if you notice, the budget, the amended budget's $120,000. So because of the short season, we're closing a little bit under budget. Any questions so far on revenues?
Why was Ani Osborne half of what our projected was? Budget?
I would say it's probably just a timing from when we start taking reservations in January and falling in the different fiscal years.
The amended budget clearly is mistaken. It's never been that high.
You guys have to remember to turn your mics on, okay? 'Cause
Thank you.
we're streaming live.
Another negative, speaking of that one, is the Ani Osborne surcharge refunds. So that's a negative line item a few lines below. It's at $60,000, and this is refunds to customers that canceled their reservation. Okay? So the net of the 2 is $315,000 in next budget year. If I scroll down another page, we get to the end of revenues, and for a grand total in the budget year 1, the orange column, $14,326,400 is what we expect to achieve total revenue for the general fund. That does include a few transfers in. You will note at the very, right above the total there, I'm circling it here with my mouse, the transfer in from Osborne Operating is 26,000. In the current year, it's 32,700, and we went with 26 both years, and the reason for that is to fund the historic homes. So this current year, 32,007 is what it takes to cover those homes, and then we scaled it back to 26 in year 2. We also have shown a transfer in from TIFA 3. Both of these transfers were missing in the department request. Now this one, the transfer in from TIFA 3 is to cover the cost of the airport. So in our change for the State of Michigan Chart of Accounts, it was required that we record all expenses to do with the airport in the general fund. So we brought all the expenses over that were being paid by TIFA 3. And when we added that budget, but we didn't add TIFA 3 reimbursing the general fund to the full extent. And so we put that in the budget as a request. TIFA 3 board did not approve that request. So that is an ask and included in that 14 million. Are we ready to go down to expenditures? Okay, we'll carry down. The first department is 101, and that is the City Commission Department with its total. Okay, the total budget ask is 48,500, and that is the same as last year. And I'm looking at it right here. We have the wages. We have $7,000 worth of dues and subscriptions, the Chamber of Commerce of $1,200, and here's our first cut, travel and training. It was $8,000 a request, cut it down to $5,000. We had cuts of $1.8 million to start off with, so it was tough in the general fund. So if there's any hit and wish on any of these line items as we go through them, please feel free to raise your hand or shout it out. Then second department is the City Manager Department. We have wages up above. Then this one has more fringe benefits than the other, because basically each department, it's only the fringe benefits that qualify, and the commission doesn't have a whole lot. But in this department, we have the pension and health insurance of full-time employees. If we scroll down to dues and subscriptions, that's where the manager's budget really begins for what his requests are. We do have postage in here. We cut $5,000 there. Travel and training cut from $4,000 to $2,000. General appropriations are the next department, 173. We have the dial-a-ride pass-through. Now this $325,000 is also revenue up above. It's grant revenue. So this is just coming in from the state and going out to the community action agency that manages the dial-a-ride for the city. This $80,000 is an appropriation to fund operations over there. And the original request was $110,600, so the 80 was a cut of $30,600. So EDC appropriation, the request was $100,000, and the funded amount is 0. They do have a sizable fund balance of in excess of $500,000. So I think part of the logic in this cut was that they can spend down their fund balance for a while before it becomes an issue for them, and would be encouraged to do that as a governmental fund. Because as governmental funds, we don't want our fund balance to be roughly, 500% of our annual expenditures. In the general fund, we are closer to between 20 and 30%, which I'll get to when we get to the end of the general fund. Then we have finance department. I know, it's exciting. The DDA appropriation, I'm sorry. The appropriation was a request of $100,009, and it was cut to $75,000. And this, again, we're looking for them, they don't have an excessive fund balance, but we're looking for them to utilize that fund balance in the first fiscal year if they need to do so to meet some of their budget requests. Total appropriations are 480,000. Any hit and wish on any of those? Okay, Finance Department. Department is 201, and I'm gonna try to get to the bottom line. 628,300 is the year one budget request. Last year was 671, and next year is 644. We did have a big change in the MERS DB. Let's see. No, it wasn't a serious change. Oh. It was moving, yeah. So we moved, thank you, we moved our water billing coordinator out to the sewer and water fund. Her work is primarily only in sewer and water, and so we made that change this budget year. The current year she's charged in our department.
It used to be that that position did more than just utility billing, but with some of the restructuring with 2 customer service reps, that position became isolated, so it made more sense to move that into the sewer water fund and have it supported by that fund outside of the general fund. So that's why we made that change internally.
Thank you, Robin. So we're on page 7, and we have the clerk's department, and no significant changes in the clerk's department as far as staffing. We do have a grand total of $743,100 in the year one budget request as compared to $768,900 in the current year.
One of the changes in the clerk's department is elections used to be housed within this department, but as part of the change with the chart of accounts, the elections became its own department. So some of those costs are allocated elsewhere, and we'll see those as we work through the general fund.
Are you gonna have an increase because of the outcome of that election?
Yeah, so I anticipate having to have early voting 9 days before, and some of those things that are being postage paid, some of those things are still unknown and will have to be worked out by the state before, hopefully before our next election, but some of those costs associated is unknown at this time.
I jumped ahead to page 8, and you can see the new department here, number 262 is elections. The total cost is $29,000 for budget year 1, and we've got a lot more detail than we currently have over here. So the next department after clerks, I scrolled back up, is assessing. And assessing is Department 257 with a total budget of $188,600. Not a whole lot of change from the year before, but a few increases. We're looking at contracted services at $10,000 as opposed to where we estimate them to be at $6,000 for the year end, but we had budgeted $35,000. Some of that budget was just anticipating more appeals for taxes and needing more appraisals, which we go to an outside source sometimes for a major appeal. Any questions in assessing or elections? Okay, I will move on to City Hall, the next governmental department. And that is a total budget of $92,900, $10,000 up from the year before. We put an extra 10 grand in the repair and maintenance. The building's getting older, and Robin and the DPW are doing a great job of maintaining it, but sometimes we have to go to outside sources. So we have the next small department is the attorney department. This is at the top of page 9 if you're following along. We have a current year projected activity of $120,500, but next year we're thinking it'll be down to $72,500, and that's primarily because we don't have a lot of MTT tax tribunal appeals in the works. We have one we're working on, and we did just hear that it'll be on the docket at the end of September. We heard that this morning. So this may be low, but at this time this is a good estimate. The next department is a couple of little fringe benefits. One of them is the life insurance for retirees, which I like to separate out in its own line item so that the commission is aware this is a cost of premiums to cover retired employees. That is the end of governmental departments in the general fund. So all those we just went over from the city manager on through this are in that cost category of general government, and those are the ones that you will be approving in one giant line in your resolution when we get there. The next category is public safety and starts with police department 301. And so I'm on page 9, scrolling down. We get from the salaries, part-time, overtime, and differential pay, we go into the fringe benefits, and I do want to point out the one that is the most costly is the police and fire defined benefit pension plan. That dollar amount in orange is $1,013,200. That's divided between the police and fire, and that is the defined benefit actuarially evaluated dollar amount that we're going to need to contribute. Plus, there's a lump sum payment in there that's required by the state as part of our revenue sharing. So that revenue sharing portion was around $140,000, and then the actuarial dollar amount is $1,009,000. So that's not all the cost of the current employees. Some of that is a legacy cost. We have the first line item that Chief Beerling would have entered is the supplies budget of $11,000. And then we scroll on down. There were a few cuts here. One of them was uniforms and gear. The request was $48,006, and then we cut it down to $38,600. And nothing more on that page, but let me scroll down another page.
One thing I did want to touch on in the police department is we did fund the captain's position back in. It's been vacant for a couple years, so we would look to fill that position hopefully in the next fiscal year. So we did fund that position back in at a partial year because Chief didn't think he would be able to fill it until partway into the fiscal year. So that is funded in there.
And all of the cuts that we made were communicated with the staff, so there was kind of some room for feedback in case anybody is wondering about that. I mean, certainly it's nice to get your full budget request, but understanding everyone has been very understanding that cuts had to be made. So the full amount in the police department is $3,514,800 for budget year 1, up slightly from the yellow column of the current year. The next department is
I
Trident.
have a question. So on the vehicles that we did last night, is that in stock and equipment? Or is
That
it
is right
being
here.
directly,
Equipment rental, $60,000 right here.
okay.
So you will see in that line item under equipment rental, in the second year request, it was 104, and that was in anticipation of future leases, and we did cut that down to 60 at the current level of the ones approved by the commission last night.
Okay. So that's the 60 grand we approved for 4 years.
If we were to go out for a capital purchase through stock and equipment again next year, you would see that in the capital budget that we'll get to closer to the end.
Okay.
So the next department is Trident, and that's our collaborative work with the other law enforcement branches in the area. And we have one employee dedicated to that function, and then we have some little supplies, and then this Trident operating from outside contributions. So whatever the outside contributions, they come in as a donation, and then they can be expended here. 306 is the Department of Auxiliary, and so that is a budget of $13,007. We have some part-timers at $8,700. There was some conversation about this being that an employee of the city can't really volunteer half his time. However, there is a potential room for change because we do hire out auxiliary services, security services now. So that is something that we'll continue to look into. The department isn't huge overall at $13,700 budget request. The next department is fire, and that's also in public safety. It's department number 336. We had some positions in here, the new positions were requested in ambulance, which we'll get to later. These are our current firefighter employees with their same large fringe benefit of almost 500,000 for the defined benefit, legacy costs, as I said. The first line item that is submitted directly from Fire Chief is the supplies budget at $11,000. It was a cut from the original 17,800 submitted. Then we cut again for the uniforms and gear, cut it from 19,400 down to 15. But there's a significant amount of costs associated with, we have fireworks, we upped that budget, and then we cut again for the travel and training. So it is in line quite a bit higher than previous years, but it was a cut from the request. So we'll see how that goes. We have hydrant rental, which is just the amount the general fund pays for the hydrants to the sewer and water fund, so that's kind of an internal transfer. And then we have utilities and equipment repair and maintenance, and this dollar amount goes up and up, and we have aging equipment, as you all noted last night. So we're looking to get some new equipment, and hopefully it will be available when we're ready for it. The total department is $1,869,700. Then we have the DPW operating expenditures. These are the operating DPW services within the general fund. That includes activities such as trees, sidewalks, alleys, culverts. Am I missing anything, Tyler? Activities in the general fund also include like barricades for events and downtown work. So this is a department, is one of the street department funds. So the same crews are spread between this department and that same number in Major Street, Local Street, and Stock and Equipment, which we'll cover later. The total line item is $492,800. Right above the total, you'll see $225. That's a big expense, but that's money that the general fund sends over to Stock and Equipment for the per hour charge of all that equipment that we're using. Any questions on DPW? I didn't mention this is the first of the departments under DPW, so police and fire above it, and now we're into this new cost category of DPW. Also included in DPW is engineering, and that's where we'll go next. We have a total request, manager recommended in budget year 1 of 4,056. So we made a few cuts in this department as well. One of them is contracted services, 20,000 down to 8,000. And the rationale for that is we're hoping that we get that department fully staffed. If it is not, we may have to do a line item transfer from the full staff of the first line item in wages down to this contracted services if they need to contract out some of their work from their heavy, busy time this summer. The next department's an easy one. It's street lighting. It's all by itself now because of the state chart of accounts, and this is just the bills for Cloverland for the street lights. The next department in DPW category is cemetery. And the total for that department is $173,800. The request was $179,000, so we did make a few little cuts there.
And within cemetery, in prior years, we had 2 part-time seasonals there that worked over the summer. It had been cut back for a couple years. We added that back into the budget this year to help maintain the grounds of the cemetery. So there is 2 part-timers that are budgeted for the summer seasonal.
Also to enable staff to fully utilize their vacation time. So that went up from $10,600 to $31,300 in the part-time seasonal line item. So the next one is Harvey Marina. We have a fairly small budget of $8,500 in that line, in that department. And then we move on to the Carbide Dock. We used to have a part-time employee here, and he was moved over to Kent Marina. So that's why this is kind of empty looking. And then we have the supplies on down to building maintenance for a total cost of $137,400. The big line item is contracted services, and I know that agreement is in the works. 595 department is airport. So I mentioned that previously. The FBO is the big line item here, and that's 120,000. And then we have the other one here is insurance. So when I took a look at this 198, I subtracted 120,000, I subtracted the insurance of 7,600, and that's where I got the ask for TIFA 3 to help support this fund, because all of these other costs used to be paid for out of TIFA 3. So that's where that comes into place. Kent Marina is the next line item, and we have taken over operations, so this is kind of a ballpark. We took a look at previous activity from the historic sites to try to estimate what our needs would be. And so we will probably need to amend this part-time through the year, but we did our best. So we have supplies. Gas, oil, and grease is one that carries over because the city general fund always paid for that. And then we have administrative expenses that used to be 54,001 have dropped off. So we exchanged some costs there. And this is where our harbor master home department is now charged. The total cost of the Kent Marina is $292,500. Ambulance is next, so that's the
Can we-
end of governmental.
On dock, I'm struggling with the 97,000 for contracted services. What do we do there? For the carbide dock?
That's not for the carbide dock, that's for
So-
the area down by the Valley Camp in that area. And
Yeah.
we're working on, so the 97,000 is what we paid Sioux Historic Sites for our cruise ship
ships?
dockings.
Okay.
So right now, there are 2 agreements in the works. They've been reviewed by insurance, they've been sent to legal today. I sent them to legal for their review, and then once it clears those, then we'll coordinate back with Famous and Sioux Historic Sites.
Okay, thanks.
So we're done with DPW cost category, and we're entering ambulance. That's on page 16. We have a budget request of $1.6 million, and it's total, and it's down to $1.4 million, and that's because we have this major cut in salaries, and that's for 3 new ambulance EMT operators, and we're hopeful that the SAFER grant will now fund these. This request was put into place before we applied for that grant. So that is the rationale for that cut. That also lowered some of these other line items in fringe benefits. However, the police and fire defined benefit pension stays the same because that's a dollar amount, lump sum by the actuaries. The first line item for this department that's kind of under more of a close control is supplies, as always, and that is at 48,000. And we scroll on down, and there are not a lot of major cuts in this department. We're gonna have new staff, we're gonna have to outfit them, we're gonna have to train them, so that department didn't face very many cuts. The next, that's the only department in health and safety. The next department, community development, is 701. We have wages and fringe benefits at the top, and then we can scroll down to supplies. They faced a little cut because we looked at the historic dollar amounts, and it didn't look like it would hurt too much to cut $1,000 out. This is when we were kind of getting down into the nitty-gritty. Dues and subscriptions stayed the same. We cut a little bit in the travel, and the total budget is $491,300. Zoning is a new department, and that is under the control of community development, but we're gonna try to isolate these costs because it's required under the state's chart of accounts. The contracted services in the prior year is having to do with the form-based code, I believe. The next department is EDC, and you see this is pretty blank because the EDC board decided to come over to BSNA, so we don't have this billing internally and having it recorded here and then over there. We're gonna see the EDC when we go over the component units, no longer in the general fund. Next department is Ani Osborne Campground. We have one full-time employee and lots of part-time seasonals. Fringe benefits are around 10% for part-time seasonals. The first line item is supplies. There was a little cut there. And scrolling down, there's not a whole lot other cuts in that department to get to a total of 256,400. Parks maintenance is the next department. So in this department, all of the parks DPW crews that manage all the parks are charged. Anything that's not puller. So we have staff that goes from the puller in the wintertime to the parks in the summertime, and they are recording their time as they work it. So if we have an early spring, they'll move over quicker, and they're doing all the mowing and the maintenance needed in the parks. I'm going to scroll down. This is page 19. So if we start with the supplies account, we had 30,003. We cut it down to 22,300. It looks like there isn't a whole lot of cuts elsewhere in that department, so we come up with a total of 5033. Puller is the next department, and like I said, these same guys generally share, go between the two seasons at the puller in the wintertime. The supplies were 19,000 requested. We cut it down to 15. There's a lot of overtime at the puller, but it really depends on the season, as you are aware. And the total department request is 414. It was cut down to 4016. Sioux Seal is the hill and lots of part-time seasonals. And we looked at historic averages of how much we paid in wages to those part-time seasonals, and we're able to cut $10,000 there for a total budget of $70,100. It hasn't been breaking even, but it's a good winter activity. Beautification is the next line item, and that's a pretty small department. We are looking to hire some part-time seasonals. Are they coming back? To manage the flower beds along the business spur and downtown, and then they buy some flowers. So $4,500. Historic homes is a part-time seasonal line item, came back when we brought them back in to working this year. And then we have the line item that is disappeared as the operational expenditures to the third party to manage them. So internal management, the budget for the current year under the old system was $30,300. It's $26,000 estimated to run it ourselves. The next department, we're almost at the end here, is capital equipment, and we will go through those particular requests when we get to that section. Okay? We have a debt service, a small debt service. This is the last year of the puller loan. And the last department is transfers out. So we have transfers out to debt service of $232,900. Transfers out for capital projects, that's $15,000. And we get to the total appropriations of $14,315,000 even for a net net positive $11,400 for the fund. This blue line is the fund balance. I've done that in each fund, so you can see the $3,587,000 is the expected fund balance. Are there any hit and wish list items for the general fund before we move down to the fund balance? Okay, the next page is the fund balance ratio. So if you haven't seen this before, we add some history. This history just carries forward each year. Each column is a year. And for the audited financial statements ending 2022, the general fund balance as a percentage of the total expenditures was 31.39%. This proposed year end, the yellow column that you've seen throughout, we're expecting it to be down to 25.36%. The budget year one, 26.68%, and then year two, 27.72%. So making small gains, but understanding year two is rough. Those are within our reasonable amounts. The required amount is to stay between 15 and 20%, according to your fund balance policy. So it's nice to have a little bit more. We probably should dust off that old policy and increase it. I think more recent recommendations calls for it to be higher than 20% as a general rule. Any questions on the fund balance ratio? Okay, well, we finished the general fund. Good job. I have the next section to be capital projects and equipment. And so we kind of touched on this briefly in the general fund, but we have them all here for you. So it's page 25, and the green is funded by the general fund. So we had a $17,000 AEDs for the police department, and that's in the vehicles, or?
Just in the department.
In the department, okay. And then we had the fire pumper that was discussed last night. Any cut in the second column is in pink, so that everyone is clear on what we cut. And this was kind of a deferral. We're gonna be going out for some quotes and see what we can do there and look at financing in the near term. The next one proposed to be funded is the fire Knox box key secure system. This is the one that's in the vehicles for the fire department so that they can safely secure all the keys for all the boxes in all the businesses around town. The self-contained breathing apparatus is cylinder replacements, $12,000. The ambulance power load system, it was cut only because we're seeing if we have grant funding for that. And so we decided to kind of defer it to see if the grant funding came in. And if not, at any meeting, these can be presented because it is an important piece of equipment for the safety of our EMT service providers. The paramedic intercept vehicle, $80,000. And then the ambulance cot lift devices power lifts, $36,000. The high pressure extrication airbags, $10,000. There was a cut here to the community puller building, and we were looking at that between year 1 and year 2, tried to prioritize. They're so expensive. I think what we're gonna have to do, I'm gonna scroll down real quick and look, that 134.4 is year 1, but then in year 2, we also had 287,000 and 300,000. So for the puller, for the ammonia chiller and the dehumidification. All of these are very important, but when you add them all together, it's a perfect borrowing scenario just to take care of those large dollar items and not necessarily erode the general fund. Another alternative is to start setting aside funds for it every year. But I know it's kind of an important near-term need over there. So if there's any hit and wish as we're going through those, feel free to add them to our list. For the puller, we did fund the lower ticket items, $25,008 for the condenser pump, the refrigeration compressor, $50,000, and $250,000 for the boiler. I shouldn't say that's a small item. That's a big item, but it was a priority. That's the general fund at the top. We do have then a couple of waste or water treatment plant items, a generator, a distribution truck, and meters for sewer at $1,550 and $40,000. We have 3 items for IT, the switch replacement, the computer replacement, and the GPS receiver package for engineering. Stock and equipment is in yellow. We have a sweeper, a plow truck with a lift gate, a motor grader was cut at $400,000, and the paint machines at $20,000. So that grader is a costly item. The next area is sidewalk replacement program. It was a request for $55,000. It was cut because they currently have over $80,000 in their capital project, and so we just thought maybe that can be spent down. And we'll reevaluate it when they get closer to the end of that pot. City LED conversion is budgeted at $35,000. It is cut, but there's a grant funding opportunity that the commission just reviewed, so it became an item for the current fiscal year. So any items that are on this list, if they get pushed into the current fiscal year, they can be removed from this, because you'll be considering them when it's presented. The next item is the parking garage maintenance plan. That's $150,000. It was cut. We will see what can be done, but there is also funding in that. I think that's around 80,000 as well. I may have got my 80,000s mixed up. The sidewalk might have been 60,000, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
There were sufficient funds in those budget line items from carryover from prior years, so we'd like to see them use up those funds before allocating additional funds to those line items.
Yes, thank you. The bridge preventative maintenance plan is 50,000, funded by road contingency. Down below here, these are in green, these are potential projects for Seal and Osborne. We have Sherman Park restroom at 40,000, Sherman Park, John Johnston roof replacement at 50,000, that would be Osborne. And the other Seal one is the chalet building at the Sioux Seal Recreation Area. The last one is the last one for general fund for year one, and that is the police department's men bathroom floor and showers at 15,000. The next line item is stock and equipment, the crushing of millings at 50,000. We have, I'm just gonna run through them real quick. Fire hydrant, 4th Avenue, lead service line replacements, East Portage Meridian Bridge CIPP main lining, Court Street Power Canal water main lining, Spruce Street main lining, sludge pump replacement, fence at the airport, all funded for a grand total of $3,109,800.
Just a quick question. There's some old equipment at Sherman Park. Would that be considered in this? Is that where you would want to, like, that tower? Is that still, that rocket tower at Sherman Park?
Are you looking to have it
To-
removed?
Yeah. Like,
Okay.
would that be
So you want to have an ad?
removed or fixed? I don't know if it can be fixed, but I know we've had, through the years, several complaints about that old.
It's really gonna be removed at this point.
Okay. I know. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I know. I wish it could be brand new, but you know how that goes. Yeah. Okay.
Did you want to wish to remove it, or are you good with the maintenance that's being provided?
I'm good with the maintenance if, if it was all fixed, because I know there was holes in it and people were getting cut and stuff, so if
Okay.
it's, yeah.
Good deal.
Thank you.
Can you tell me about the motor grader with wing that was cut? Can you share what that is and the purpose and why it was cut?
Yep, so in discussion with Director Perrin, he felt that that could be pushed off one more year, and that our fleet would get us through another fiscal year, and that could be cut currently. So, and, like Director Collins had mentioned, there were conversations with each of the department heads before any cuts were made that wouldn't negatively impact their operations from a standpoint of providing service to the public. So we had to cut 1.8. It was difficult to get the budget balanced, but we tried to do it in a means of not impacting our operations or impacting the department's ability to do the services that they provide to the community.
We also asked for a prioritization, and so he kind of gave us that list. And that helped because to know what's most important to them. But also, we needed to take a look at ideas to go forward. So just like we were talking about the puller, we talked about maybe starting some savings initiatives. Stock and equipment has been a challenge for us. How to keep that fund doing well because it's highly variable, especially the last few years. So we'd like to get it to a safe place where it can start setting aside funding for future purchases. And that would be a longer-term goal. Are there any other questions about year one capital? On page 2, I have summarized them by the funding source. at the top here. So you can see the general fund, it was $1,447,000, and we got it down to $430,000. Seal is $115,000, stock and equipment $935,000. With that $400,000 cut, it got down to $535,000. Osborne $50,000, road contingency at $50,000. The couple of items that were cut there was that grant for the LED lighting, the parking garage, the $80,000 command vehicle. That this is erroneous here, this grant information, that should not be there, sorry. The IT fund, $43,005, sewer and water capital reserve, $825, sewer and water capital SRF funding, that $755.5 was included some of those CIPP linings, and that was part of the presentation last night, that we were looking to apply for funding from the state on those. And then TIFA 3 is the $35,000 for the fence, I believe, and sewer capital reserve, $190,000. Okay, year 2, I'm not even gonna go over it much. We did cut one thing just to keep the budget positive. But these are just kind of, you know, they're in the 6-year CIP. These are just kind of for your awareness. The official action taken about the budget, we do record year 2, but it's not a, you know, state requirement to do a second-year budget. Are we ready to move on to the next section? Sewer and Water Fund. Okay, at the top, we have revenues, and after we go through the budget requests, we're gonna go through the sewer and water rate setting. So if you have questions on that, you'll get to see kind of a little more detail on how we establish those rates each year and what we're proposing for this year, next year. We start with late fees, some of these little guys at the top, but the first large ticket item is 59200642601, and that's the administrative charge. So that's $292.9. And then we have the commodity charge and the capital charge, and those are the variable too that depend on usage, which Callie will review with us in a few minutes. The next one is a negative, so that's the discount for e-billers. And then we have the next 3 large ticket items that are sewer revenues, and then their e-billing discount. And then we have lots of interest. We did very well this year on our interest, so we had to bump up our projections on those to account for the current rates we're seeing out there. Property rental is a lease agreement for the tower. The tower rentals for the water tower, lease rentals for satellite? Or,
It's like Verizon or AT&T have space on our towers that they pay a rental revenue to us.
Thank you. Miscellaneous water is charges for the fire lines, and I think the hydrants are in there too, yes, sorry. Okay, so we'll scroll down. We have transfers in here. So we have transfers in from CSO C3. So in these CSOs, and transferring from road contingency is small, but the 419 and 420, we have old capital projects, and we have special assessments being paid still. So as those assessments are being paid, we're transferring the total amount over to the sewer and water fund, because that's where the debt is held. And then we have transfers in for the equipment from the sewer capital equipment and the water capital equipment funds. And these depreciation reserves, we're no longer using them, so those are zeroed out. Grand total revenues are $12,519,400. The first department is staff support water. And I'm gonna explain that increase there, because remember in finance department, we moved our water billing coordinator. That's what the increase is here. We had her wages split between staff support water and staff support sewer. We keep those separated so that at some point, if we go for financing, we can clearly identify the difference between expenditures between water and sewer. So we have all those fringe benefits. This also includes our water director. Under supplies, we have, just miscellaneous billing type of supplies. Dues and subscriptions have to do, and the contracted services have to do with our water billing firm that we use. Accounting and management goes back to the general fund for our services. Central service costs, we discontinued using in favor of in accounting and management. So if you look at accounting and management went up quite a bit from an old year, and then central service cost decreased. So that's just a new way of calculating that we started last year. In lieu of taxes is like a tax bill internally. So we use the capital our full capital assets from the audit to calculate what it would be a tax bill on that if we were taxed as a regular property owner. Computer services helps support the internal service fund of IT. Postage, insurance, and depreciation. Oh, depreciation expenses, just like an enterprise fund, just like a business, we record depreciation expense for all of the capital assets. So that's an estimate at this time, but you can see in prior years it's going up every year as we invest. I'm going to move over to the staff support sewer. We have the new wages and fringe benefits here, and then we have supplies just like above. In lieu of taxes, it's basically the same, all just with sewer. The first operating department is water filtration plant, and so that would be the plant that Kirk is the director for. We have all the staff costs there and their fringe benefits. Moving down to supplies, we have all these line items, what it takes to run that facility, and building maintenance for a grand total of $845,700. Transmission and distribution are the crews that work in the streets. They work out of the street department, and they manage the infrastructure under the roads and beside the roads, making sure that all the houses have their running water and sewer outflow. Operating meters, so this department, we lost staff last year. You can see how it decreased. We're continuing on with the 1 meter reader, and with support from our new software, that has become a manageable task. Although this gentleman is still helping as other transmission and distribution to replace those meters and continue that upgrade. The supplies are $25,000, software license maintenance for some of that reader equipment, $36,000, for a grand total $143,900. Sewer system is the crews working out, one guy here. We have wages and fringes down to supplies, the costs for new pipes, equipment, for a grand total of $172,300. Sewage treatment plant, 545 department, we have the crew over there, including Brian Masterson, and we have the cost to run that facility for a grand total of $1,134,300. Lift station, we've identified these lift stations and their maintenance that is needed for them as a separate department. Capital equipment, we have some items that we just reviewed in these 2 line items, $65,000 for transmission and distribution and $40,000 for meter, for a total $105,000. Debt service is a big category. That's all the debt that we know and love, for a total of $2,786,900. Transfers out. This $2,796,000 is just a transfer into debt service reserve. So we keep about 1 year debt service in segregated funds. We invest them for the city, and at any given time, we should have enough to fill the next year, so that if cash ran short, we'd have that there set aside. Total appropriations, $13,799,100, for a fund balance of $33,371,200. And you say, that's a lot of cash, Kristen. Well, that because it includes the capital, because this is an enterprise fund that's recorded like a regular business. So for these funds, I have included the cash balance, and it looks like, we would expect to have 6,700,000 on hand at the end of the fiscal year one. The next section is sewer and water rate settings, and all those numbers we just reviewed go into this, and I'm going to hand it over to Callie.
Okay, so Kristen and I kind of tag teamed these this year.
Does everybody know Callie from our finance department? All right.
Hi.
And so Callie's been shadowing through the process. She's doing a great job, so she took the lead on the water sewer, so. let her.
Thank you. All right, so the first page you can see is page 37 of the PDF. This is the overall summary of what we're proposing the change in the water rates to be. So you can see at the bottom, for a typical customer who would be 5,000 gallons a month, we did switch from cubic feet to gallons this last year. It's about 2.2%. So a monthly bill for a person or a household that uses 5,000 gallons will be $133.46. Before I go any further, that's about $2.90 more a month than our current rate structure is, or $34.80 a year. There's a lot that goes into this to get to this point. This is more of a summary, this next 4 pages of the final amounts. What we do is we start with taking all those expenses you just saw from the water treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant, transmission and distribution, to the work that's done downstairs, and we analyze all those costs. So we look at what it's going to be, what the department has requested, if we make any cuts, are there any capital requests coming through for new projects, or if we have to match money on any grants coming. We look at all those costs to see what the total expenditures for the fund is going to be. Then we analyze the number of water customers we have. We look at what our software says, and we try to do a trend going forward to see where we're likely going to be. And we also consider the amount of gallons pumped from the plant each year. So we look at consumption, which has been trending down because of new toilets that are installed in houses that are using less water, things like that. But we did see an uptick from the meter project, which we anticipate to be from the old meters not reading the water usage properly. So our accountability is going up. So we are seeing that, and as we finish that project out, we'll get better numbers. And talking to our water billing coordinator today, there's about 120 meters left that need to be changed. Most are residential. There's about 20 businesses that we still need to get. So we're working on that. If you go to the next page.
And that 100 is out of 5,000, roughly 5,200 customers.
Yep.
So they've done a great job.
And we're changing those ourselves now. We're not using HydroCorp anymore, so that's why it's really slowed down, is when we go to do a business, it might take 2 guys to change a larger meter, and we're just working to schedule those. And then the residential, we're just trying to catch the stragglers who are left, basically, the ones that we missed. This page is, like I said, it shows the rates per gallons consumed. So the highlighted in blue is 5,000 gallons, which is a typical 4-person household. We just use that as our average. So that would see a 2.22% increase in the numbers that I went over. So last year they would have paid $130 a month. They're going to pay $133 this year if these go through. Going to the next page. This is taking the numbers that we calculated per month and putting them into a revenue line item, calculating it out based on the number of bills we're going to produce, and putting it into the different revenue line items you saw. So the first is the administration fee. So this is even if you don't use any water, if it's hooked up and on, you're going to pay an admin fee of about it's going to be about $6 or $7 a month. I don't know the exact figure. So that's what it would be, even if you're not using any water. It's just to have the water service on in your home. The commodity charge is to basically pay, well, the capital charge is to pay for all of the infrastructure. So we did bump a little more into the capital reserves this year to help pay for some of the projects coming up. I believe there was some water tower paintings. And then we also did this again for the sewer side of it as well, just in case we have the big water treatment plant project lingering. So we wanted to set aside some additional funds in the reserves to account for any matches we might have to do or things that are coming up. So there's 3 components to the bill: the administration charge, the capital charge, and the commodity charge kind of covers everything else in that. That doesn't fall within a capital infrastructure or an administration charge, and that's on both water and sewer. So we're looking at total sewer or water and sewer revenue for the year of about $9,100,000 for year 1 and $9,132,000 for year 2. In this last page, we just calculate a bulk water cost. So what we do is we look at the total gallons that are pumped from the plant over all the costs to calculate a bulk cost. I believe this is what like the I-500 would get billed at, a rate like this. Leak adjustments to help us calculate those types of those things. So this is just what of the bare minimum of the bulk water production costs. So if there's any questions, just let me know.
Nice job, thank you. Okay, so I just want to scroll back one slide to the transfers out. So we're transferring out to the sewer capital reserve $500,000 and the water capital reserve $825,000. So those are big numbers. It's setting it aside for costs that we know will be there. Sorry. Okay. Transfers out, just quickly summarize those. And the next funds after the analysis of the water rates are those reserves we talked about. 585 is the sewer capital reserve. 586 is the water capital reserve. And if I go back to this one, after year 1, its fund balance is $363,700. And the fund balance in the water capital reserve is only $26,002. So we're spending it as fast as we put it in there. But next year, before all the capital, we're looking at $753,000. But we'll be adding capital requests to that. Any questions on sewer and water fund, all the reserves and all the rates? Any hit or wish on any of that? Okay. So we can go to the component units. We'll start with the EDC fund, that's Fund 244. And the EDC, like I said, is coming over to our software. So they entered these numbers themselves right on the software. And they have this revenue of $257,400 in their general fund. The expenditures start with wages, just like all the other departments, and then go down to supplies, contracted services, computer services. They support the IT fund just like the other funds. Printing and advertising, travel and training for a grand total of $239,900. I should scroll up just briefly and show that appropriation where it is here. So the appropriation from the general fund with the ask of $100,000, this is where it got cut. So if you look down on page 45 at the end of the fund, we can see that the fund balance is $569,700. And I'm just peeking up. Total appropriations is $371,000, but that includes these transfers out, so. That was the rationale behind that. I'm going to scroll down to page 47 for TIFA 3, Fund 247. So we have tax proceeds in this fund because it's a tax capture fund. And the TIFA 3 has the generous and wonderful bonus of having a base value above which everything is captured of nearly zero. I think it's $200. We have expenditures of basically just transfers out to the EDC, the LDFA, I'm sorry. The general fund for the airport, then the EDC, the LDFA is cut, because we only needed that in previous years, and then capital projects of 35,000. So the fund balance in Tifa 3 is $684,900, and I know that the EDC and Tifa 3 boards are setting aside funds for a major work, capital work at the airport. So that is the intent of this built-up fund balance. Fund 248 is the DDA fund, and we have revenue here with the PSD, that's the Principal Shopping District, it's a special assessment. It's reassessed every 5 years, and it's billed every year, and we're not in that line of a reassessment in the near future, so it remains the same. MEDC match on Main, we have more grant revenue coming in for downtown businesses. We have promotions revenue, sidewalk business plowing contributions from businesses, and lots of donations and sponsorships. Grand total revenue of $293,400. One thing here is the appropriation from the general fund. There's the $100,009 that was asked, and the cut to $75,000. And I will get to their fund balance in just a minute to explain that, where we're ending up. Expenditures here, we have the wages, we have a new part-time seasonal request, and all the fringe benefits associated with that staff. We have supplies, all the way down to promotions expenditures, and then starts our new DDA events line items. So DDA director and I work together to set up all these events so that each one has a revenue and an expenditure. So at any given time, we can run a report to see how much each event generated or lost at the end of, after we have some activity. They're brand new, but we're gonna put a good effort in this year to itemize that. The DDA total expenditures, when you include the match on Main and the rental, all the different things, is $319,300. No transfers out. Net appropriations is negative $25,009, and that draws down on this $31,700 fund balance to leave $5,800 in there. So that was part of the logic behind the appropriations cut. And I did mention to the DDA board, this is not a long-term answer. You're gonna have to figure out how to sustain yourselves or ask for more next year again, and maybe the commission will support that. Are there any hit or wishes for the DDA component unit? We have TIFA capture. So the DDA has 2 tax captures. They do not have the generous base value of $200. Their base value is from the 80s, and so unfortunately, it's been a struggle to grab any more than we have right now. What we're seeing here in the next year is the tax capture is $31,009 in TIFA 1. But we do have generous support from the hospital tax shortfall and the tribal tax shortfall. So that's the medical office building and the 2 office buildings on Ashman that are the old J.C. Penney, if you're familiar. They have agreed to contribute until tax capture ends in 2026, 7, whenever that is. Grand total revenues of $198,400. Transfers out to the parking garage, $195,000 for an ending fund balance of $8,200. Oh, it's in and it's out. TIFA 2 is similar, although it does have a better tax capture, resulting in tax revenue of $122,200. This personal property loss, it comes from the state. It's an annual distribution, and I didn't cover it, but it's in TIFA 1 as well and in TIFA 3. Total revenue is $137,400. The transfer out to the parking deck is $102,000 of that, and then right above it, $55,000 helps support the bond issue for this building that we're in. Net appropriations is negative $20,000, and the ending fund balance is $7,300 in budget year 1. Any questions, hit or wish on either of the component units?
You have a schedule in here of our debt obligations and their expirations, don't you?
It's not in here.
Okay.
I have it. I can pull it up if you want.
No, I was just curious on those, tax shortfalls of 2027, is that tied to the parking deck payoff?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
The attorneys would not let us borrow beyond the life of the tax capture. But I will make a note for myself to distribute the debt service, maybe put it on the next agenda for information only.
Is everybody doing good? We'll keep rolling through. Next, we're gonna get to the majors and the locals.
Okay. Major street, local street, and stock and equipment. You remember we went through in the general fund, the DPW Department 441. Those same crews are also charged to these three departments, so I thought it would be nice to put them next so that you can see where the rest of their time is spent. Major street, we have revenue. It's a governmental fund, but it's a special revenue fund because the state funds it as its own activity. And pretty much all of that revenue is coming from the state. So we have $1,849,300 in the major streets. And you know, there was a time not that long ago that this fund really suffered, but the state did come through and offer a little bit more support for the locals in the way of increasing these revenue line items. So we're pleased to use that wisely. Below in the expenditures, we have wages, fringe benefits, and on down to supplies. Now in supplies in the major streets is dirt and CP7 and everything else that's put into maintaining those roads. And the internal service supplies are the things that that are held at the DPW complex that we charge out based on timesheets. The supplies in 726 are the ones that are charged directly to the fund, and the ones that go to the internal services are charged through the yard. Contracted services include, work on, below it, we have traffic signal maintenance, pavement marking, and guardrails. We've separated that out. But we also have, anytime we have to hire out for work to be a pothole, a larger hole to be filled by a pavement company. Electricity, equipment rental, and internal services equipment rental. This line item here is pretty big. That's the rental equipment rates that we use on the large pieces of equipment held at the DPW complex and used throughout the streets. Accounting and management and insurance are part of what we call overhead in this fund. And the transfers out, this transfer out is to local, because local street fund, as you'll see next, is always a little bit behind major streets, a little less funded. And that service is just a transfer out to what remains of the debt. There is not very much debt in these street funds. The grand total end fund imbalance is $2 million, so it's a healthy fund balance. And I'm pleased to present that. Local street, like I said, suffers a little bit more. Their grant revenue is always a little less, even though roughly 60%, if I'm correct, and Dave can tell me if I'm not, is local streets. 60% is local and 40% is major, but who gets most of the money? Yeah, and I understand, because the roads are bigger and probably harder to maintain, but in this fund, we have $728,000 worth of revenue. Same sort of expenditures as we saw before. Every day, street crews fill out a daily timesheet, and we charge it out based on where they were. So if they're on the local streets, they put it in a certain column so that we can charge it out accurately. We have a similar thing going on for overhead, and the ending fund balance is $240,400. With that $50,000 coming in as a transfer in up above from Major Street. We'll scroll down. The next fund in the street group is stock and equipment. That is an internal service fund, as I described earlier. So all of the activity in this fund is to serve other funds, mainly the general fund, local street, major street that we just went over. So this is the home department for all the street crews. The revenue is charges to the other funds, basically. The charges for services, 150,000. And then that would be possibly, one example would be a DPW mechanic is working on a police department vehicle. They would write up a charge slip. Supplies and materials would be what they're bringing in from the other funds, so for the CP7 gravel that's used on the roads. Building rental is just what we charge the sewer and water fund for its offices over there. Equipment rental is all that heavy equipment. So when you look at this, just remember that all of those revenues that are charged to the funds that this fund serves are helping to buy that grader and that we cut, you know. So whatever we do in this fund that charges it out accurately and keeps those, that keeps more equipment rolling on our streets.
So Stock and Equipment owns our fleet. So all of the vehicles in our fleet are owned and operated by Stock and Equipment.
And this general fund transfer, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Robin, because this 80,000 is to pay for that command vehicle. So we're gonna have Stock and Equipment buy it and then rent it out to general fund. Appropriation, so this is the expenditure side. We have Department 441, all the wages at the top, then supplies at 25,000. We have gas, oil, and grease. This, we've been experiencing some increased prices, so we're hoping this is enough. We may have to come back for the current year, and hopefully this is enough for next year. Supplies for resale is just all that that gets bid out, all the piles of various materials over there at the DPW complex. We have accounting and management fees. That's all scheduled out, how that is divided out between the other funds. Computer services, similar thing, based on the costs of those funds. Depreciation expense is all the depreciation for each piece of equipment. And then we have a total operating expenditures of $2,094,700. We have equipment purchases here. It was $885, now it's $565 because of a $400,000 cut. We have a little loan at Old Mission Bank for a couple of pieces of equipment, a loader and a grader. And we have the transfer out to road contingency. And the fund balance of $419,004 with an estimated cash balance of $158,119 at the end of next budget year. Questions, hit or wish? We're making great progress. We're on page 60 of 86. So if anybody wants a break, it's fine. Okay.
So when we formerly paid cash for all of our purchases, then it came out of this fund, and not general fund,
All the equipment, the rolling stuff.
so.
So for example,
It's dwindled quite a bit.
yeah. So, you know, if a specific department has a vehicle, it's owned by Stock and Equipment, they pay a rental
Charge
on it.
back.
When they're done with it, it goes back into Stock and Equipment.
Any analysis of why that has happened? If Stock and Equipment is kind of a expense-driven fund and not, do we have fewer
I think
rentals?
we-
Are we charging less to the departments? Are we,
I think we should save for equipment. I think we should set aside funds for equipment. We used to have a reserve, but we were draining it as quickly as we were, you know, filling it. And so it kind of went by the wayside. I don't think always the cuts is the right answer here. I don't see our borrowing as a bad decision either. I mean, we needed new equipment, we got it. It is kind of used over a period of time, so it's not, you know, all the costs don't have to occur in the first fiscal year.
The other thing that impacted Stock and Equipment is COVID, because our crews weren't out on the street working. So that had a negative impact to COVID, and it was over a period of time. It's rebounding, and Director Perrin is doing a great job in making sure the crews are out and working on the street and helping to rebuild that fund, but COVID did negatively impact Stock and Equipment.
Anytime the staff stays in their home department, anytime they, their charges stay in their home department whenever they're on vacation, if they're using funeral leave, any of that stuff stays in their home department. So that, it's a drain. But I do welcome any input for how to better fund that fund, because it does need it, and it's an important activity. The next thing on our agenda is the parking funds. They're enterprise funds. 514 and 577 is the parking deck fund. So we're on page 62. We have revenue in the parking funds, meter receipts, permits, fines and violations, for a total of 162,000. Now, quite a while ago, I presented something to the commission about charging for Ashman parking, Ashman and Portage. That's where this would land if we decided to start charging, especially our tourists, for using that prime parking locations in front of our businesses. So I know it was a controversial subject. If you see this fund and you want to reconsider that at some point in time, that is where this would go to help support and maintain those parking lots. Appropriations in the surface parking fund start with wages, fringes, supplies are minimal. This first Department 307 is parking enforcement. We did have an increase in our bringing our parking enforcement officer to full-time proposed in this budget, but only half is charged here. The other half is charged in the parking deck.
And it also should be noted, bringing our parking enforcement officer full-time, there was also a reduction in the part-time seasonal wages as the individual that was doing our meter collection and repair retired, per se. And so those duties have been kind of allocated out to our DDA maintenance person that falls under DPW and our parking enforcement officer. So we did make parking enforcement full-time, but there was a reduction of a part-time person in that department.
I've heard good reviews too about the assistance that our parking enforcement officer is receiving from DPW staff. So we have a total department line item request of 47,000, cut from 49 requested, so a little bit there. Operating expenditures in the 441 department, that's the DPW services provided to maintain those parking lots. They're charged out on their timesheets, just like the streets. But they are posted, instead of their line item wages, they're posted to this 805 department and charged in that different way. Same with sewer and water has a line item like this for any work done by street crews in that enterprise fund. So 85,000 is how much it took, basically remove the snow and do the maintenance in the spring. And I know I'm making light of it. It's not it's not that simple, but that's what I call it. Depreciation expense, 15,000 in this department and 110,500 total. Transfer out to the parking garage, $100,000. So there was enough in this fund to help support that debt service of the parking fund, which we have until 2026. Net appropriations, negative 95,000. Ending fund balance, 2,382,000. Cash balance is just 53,800. So it doesn't have a whole lot of cash at the end, but it will suffice. And we will do an amendment if needed during the year. The next fund is Fund 577, that's our parking deck. We have some generous revenue up in the top. So we have the hospital contributing to the debt in the first line item and contributing 25% of operations and capital in the second line item. Transient revenue for the parking garage, so people coming and going without a proxy card, and then the annual permits are the proxy card holders. We have transfers in from the general fund of 149.4. That is way down from last year at 341, and that's partly because of that generous donation from the surface parking of 100,000. We have transfers in from TIFA 1 to support the debt service of 195, 102 from TIFA 2. The transfer in from the parking I just mentioned, and then water debt service, that's just a little contribution for a part of the parking deck structure that is owned where there's water infrastructure below, maybe sewer, I don't know for sure. Total revenues of $793,700. Appropriations include the parking enforcement officer wages at full-time now, fringe benefits, a few little supplies, contracted services, accounting and management, same sort of thing here, computer services, and for a total of $56,800. Equipment repair and maintenance is cut. It's a big number, but it was a double ask. We need to put equipment repair and maintenance in the next department, which is the operating expenses. DPW does all the maintenance now, so that was just a kind of an erroneous request. Operating expenditures in that 441 line item total 259.2, and a big part of that is the depreciation expense for the building that's just housed there at $165,000. There was not a whole lot of cuts or movement in that department. Capital equipment, we talked about a gate, a new gate at $50,000 this year, but we cut it because we haven't made much movement. We doubted we would buy it in the current fiscal year. But if we go to look at that again, we will propose to the commission and go out for bids. The big cost in this fund is $485,200 worth of debt service. And we're all familiar with that. Transfer outs to the capital projects, that's the cut of $150,000 for the maintenance. And as Robin noted, we had a little bit left over all in an existing project fund. Net appropriations is negative $7,500, and the cash balance is $555,758. That's what I expect, and that's enough to cover the next year's debt service if we got in a pinch. Any questions or hit and wish on either of the parking funds? Page 67, I started listing the other funds. We've got Seal operating, Osborne operating. Now remember, these operating funds is where we spend the trust distribution. It's not the trust, but all of that is at the direction of the commission if you want to appropriate from that. We went over a couple of those in the capital project requests, and we'll go over them in more detail. The next three are Perpetual Care, Seal Estate Trust, and Osborne Trust. These are the trusts. They basically are there to earn money and distribute for our use. Other governmental funds include Brownfield Tax Capture, the LDFA Smart Zone Fund, which is another tax capture from schools. Fund 253 is other special revenue, and 285 is the gaming fund with the tribe's contribution of $340,000 each year. So if there's anything you want me to explain in these funds are not as clear-cut as some of the earlier ones. We're not as familiar because they're smaller. Let me know. We have the transfer into the Seal operating fund of $60,800 as revenue, and that amount will decrease soon. We have T-bills that matured, and so this is the last of the big. It's going down. You see next year it's 50,000, so that will continue to decrease unless we have some really great investment returns coming up in the near future. But it was, what was it, 7%? Yeah, so we're unlikely to see a return of that. Appropriations, nothing here. Debt service, we have the little puller loan, and that is paid in full after this budget year one. Transfers out, we have the $115,000, which is an increase because the recommended budget includes fully funding the projects of the chalet and the Sherman Park from the Seal operating fund as opposed to from the general fund.
Can I ask a question about that? Will those projects still go through the proper Seal funding format?
They'll still have to be a request and then come to the commission, correct?
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have a net appropriations of negative 49,004 and an ending fund balance of 334,300 in that operating fund. The next operating fund is 106, and that's Osborne Operating Fund, so that's the History Trust. So all expenditures are required to be in the promotion and education of historic ventures. Transfer in is 21,008, a little bit of interest, 23,800 being total revenue. Transfer out to the general fund of 26,000, we mentioned that earlier, that's to cover the historic homes. 50,000 is a transfer out to capital projects, and that's to cover the roof at the Johnston House that we covered earlier in the capital requests. That's net appropriations of negative 52,002. Fund balance was 60,001, so it leaves $7,900. Any questions or concerns on that fund? 151 is perpetual care. And we basically have interest, earnings, and revenue in this fund. And we've been looking to potentially go out for an investment advisor, and it would include this fund. So we could possibly improve the yield. Sometimes this fund, in the yellow year, it funded some purchases that were used at the cemetery, but nothing is requested in the next budget year. The ending fund balance is 346,700. Fund 155 is the Seal Estate Trust. Interest earnings are 60,000 in the next budget year and 51,200 in the second year. And that is a direct calculation of the amount that gets sent over to the operating fund that I mentioned earlier. So you'll see the transfer out down below. Net appropriations is negative $1,200, and the ending fund balance is $1,419,500. Fund 156 is the Osborne Trust, and it's very similar to the Seal. It's got the promotion of history. The Seal has promotion of recreation. The ending fund balance is $1,011,300. 32,000 coming in, 21,008 going out to the operating fund. Any questions on these other funds? Okay, we're going to go over to Brownfield. That's Brownfield tax capture. It does not have any tax capture right now. We haven't had any new Brownfield projects in a while. There's a couple of things being discussed, nothing official at this time. We have $20,000 being requested for environmental assessments. The negative appropriations total is 18,000, and the ending fund balance is 122,200. Fund 250 is the LDFA Smart Zone Fund. We have tax proceeds. This is a big deal here. We've had very dismal tax proceeds in the past. This yellow year, 195,700. I thought that was great, but in budget year one, 317,900. So we're finally starting to have some growth in our taxable value that results in better capture. The taxes refunded is just an estimate. It probably won't happen in this yellow column, but we just have to put it just in case. We have the Gatekeeper Grant, which the city manager and other assistants has renewed for the Smart Zone Fund at $100,000. Property rentals, this is tenants at the building, $35,008, and for a total revenue of $433,100. This is a 200 fund, so it's a special revenue fund. So everything coming in needs to be used for a specific purpose. And in this case, it is assisting with technology-related or other new ventures in our area. And so we have expenditures related to that. We have the consultant of $165,000. That's a very rough guess. We'll see what we can do there. Contracted services of $17,500. This department down here under 806 is kind of what it's taking to run the building. So that building is there to house all these fledgling businesses, so it is at a cost of $43,200, and we just took it over, so some of these numbers. We worked with EDC, they provided all the information they could, but some of these numbers might be, end the year differently. We have transfer out to TIFA 3. Now, this is a proposed number. The LDFA board has not met to approve this budget yet. But this is proposed because the LDFA board voted a few years ago to repay TIFA 3. TIFA 3 supported LDFA when it had no money, helped pay the bond on the building. And so this is a partial repayment of $120,100 for these 2 years, and a third year, and then it will be paid off. The other transfer out of $162,003 is the debt service on the building, and that will be paid off. I'm glad to see in the green column, there is no debt service. Remember that debt service, what Don's question earlier, cannot go beyond the life of the capture, and this capture is to terminate unless it's extended another 5 years. There is an opportunity to extend it, so we'll see what we can do there. We'd still be able to use the funds, we just would discontinue capturing if it ends. Any questions on LDFA or any of these other funds that I had in that category? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed Special Revenue Fund. Special Revenue Fund 253 is where we put very special, unique types of income that is geared toward, we want to save it up and use it toward a specific purpose. We had the big deal recently was the ARPA funds landed in this fund. And so that's why we have a large fund balance, but it shows as a negative, and that's because we're using up the ARPA funds. If I were to extend all this and tell you everything in this fund has a reserve, and so it totals that $1.1 million, but it's all line item divided out. There's some police reserves for drug forfeiture, crime proceeds, there's land sales, about $40,000, and then the big ARPA funds. Fund 285 is gaming, and that is our generous donation from the Sioux Tribe for our gaming compact, $340,000, with 40 of that being earmarked for the River of History Museum rent, leaving us with $300,000 that we generally use for street repairs or parks types of projects. It had a beginning fund balance of $137,004, and the ending fund balance is $437,400. That is that group of other funds, and we have another batch of other funds, if your appetites will allow. Anybody need a break? Any hit and wish? Okay. We're at page 78 out of 86, so we're really getting there. Debt Service Fund 351. We also have other internal service funds in this group of IT fund, healthcare fund, and then the 2 fiduciary pension funds of 732 and 736 PEHP. 351 is the debt service fund, and that everything that is a debt that is not sewer and water or another enterprise fund is held and recorded here. The funds that benefit are usually the ones that pay for that debt service, but anytime the city brings on new debt, we make sure who is responsible for funding it. So, for this building, we have contributions from the general fund. We have contributions a little bit for this building from Major Street. And we have TIFA 2 supporting this building debt as well. And then the Smart Zone LDFA building is there. And we have the revenue coming in from the funds at the top and the principal, interest, and fees at the bottom. So the $4,500 is the net appropriations for the fund, and there's a fund balance of $286,700. It's not enough to cover a full year, but it's got a little reserve in there. Fund 636 is the IT fund. The first line item of revenue, that $500,000 in the budget, is what we have asked of all the other funds. And those expenses we've seen, 809 is the account number for those. So every fund helps support IT, and then IT buys us new computers and everything else that we need and takes care of it for us by providing for internet access, phone coverage, everything that makes all of our electronic transmissions possible. So we have a total revenue of 5046. We have salaries and fringe benefits in that fund. Supplies at the bottom is the first one we kind of have more control over of 15,000. Toner, printer, copier supplies of 33,000. We have a contract with National Office Products. Tools and equipment, 2,500. Software license and maintenance of 100,000. This one grows, and it grows. And Bonnie does a great job of summarizing it for us. You'll be seeing more information in next year's audit because we're going to do just what we did for the leases. We're going to start showing the commitment to these software license agreements. And communications, which I believe is internet and phone charter. And then we have a total for all the expenditures, including depreciation, of $456,700. The next department in this fund is GIS. We no longer charge an employee to this, but we do have dues and subscriptions that are pretty sizable. Grand total with depreciation is $26,004. Equipment wishes, $30,000 in equipment for computers, and GIS is the $13,005 that we went over earlier in the capital. Net appropriations are negative $22,000. Ending fund balance, $356,200, and cash balance of $302,925. This fund wasn't always as healthy. It's good to have a little cushion in there just in case some big thing happens. So I don't recommend decreasing revenue or increasing expenditures too much in that fund, but we'll certainly take hit or wish if you have them. Fund 679 is a healthcare fund. This covers employees and retirees. The revenue in the fund is employer contributions. So all those line items that you saw in everybody's fringe benefits is the employer's contribution to this internal service fund and shows as revenue, that $1,062,000. The employee contribution of $80,000 is how much I have removed from every paycheck to pay for an upgrade to my health insurance. Retirees' contribution, they're paying the full cost of theirs at the computed rate. And a transfer in from the general fund was a bit of a gasp from me. This fund wasn't doing well and it needed support. So that's the ask, just to keep this fund in the black. Even in the current year, we had some unexpected large charges. Our health care is a self-funded plan. So in a tough health year, we could see these kinds of things. And so we have budgeted for them to happen again, and hopefully it will not. The first department is city active employees, and then we have the second department is retirees. So total, we have a little bit of premiums in there for big expenses, but the total claims, individual claims are submitted and paid for by us on a summarized basis monthly at $1,253,000 for actives and $157,600 for retirees. Total, oh, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, if you can see on this, like Kristen said, we were a little bit surprised when we got into this fund that it needed support from the general fund. So you can see the transfer in from the general fund is 210 in this coming fiscal year and 160 in the next fiscal year. And that was driving from the increase in the hospitalization claims for the retirees. The activity in, a prior year was 30,000 and it's 180 in the current. So that really drove that cost up unexpectedly because, like Kristen said, we are self-funded. So that wasn't something we were anticipating, needing support from the general fund, but we were able to balance it out and make that contribution there. Hopefully it'll level out, but unexpected things do happen and we need to account for them.
And we hope for a healthy year for more reasons than that, right? So we have Net appropriations of a negative 18.6 in the yellow year, current year, 26,002 next year. And the ending fund balance is 36,200 in budget year that we're looking at, budget year one. Also based on feedback from what Robin said is we checked with our healthcare management team and they reviewed that and we kind of made sure there wasn't just some big error in that. So it looks like it's a reality. At the end, we have the pension funds. So Fund 732 is the police and fire pension. The employees' contributions, so employees generously donate X percentage based on their union contract to this fund, and that's that first line item. The employer contributes based on the actuarial valuation, and that meeting, I'll put a plug, coming up on April 26th, and you're all welcome to attend. The actuarial will present the basis for these numbers. 60,000 is interest, dividend income is 420, these are guesses, for a grand total revenue of 2,671,900. And the dividends and interest added together should be around our actuarially determined rate of just under 7%. 6.5, is it? Finance department is the pension benefit payments going out as the first line item. That's how much we pay out. Ours is a mature fund. We pay out more than we bring in. And that's just where we are in the spectrum of the life of the plan, but we, you know, our time horizon is forever. So we hope to always have this fund for our participants. Fund manager fees of 42,000. Those are our individually managed funds. We have banking and services. Investment advisor, very important services of $100,000. Actuarial services of 15,006. Insurance, fiduciary insurance of 8,000 for a total expense of 2,604,500. We have change in market value. That's just the reality of, I think that's an average of what it's been over the years, but hopefully that does not happen. We have an ending fund balance of 19.5, and year two we're up to 20,000,007. So it's a big fund. It's managed well, but we're struggling. We're underfunded, and that's why we have large employer contributions.
Just on that, as a side note, Kristen Kelly and I have engaged conversations with MERS and all of our police fire membership to transition the in-house administration of our police fire pension to MERS. So over the last several months, we've been engaging in question and answer sessions, and that may be something that we'll be bringing to the commission at some point in time to transfer that management administration of it to MERS.
Some of these costs would go down, and MERS insists, I mean, their data shows that their returns would go up. So it would be nice if we could get improved or same services. And I have full confidence that we would be able to do that, but it is a negotiated item. So each union would have to agree and ask us to do that, make that change. Fund 736 is the PEHP, Post-Employment Healthcare Fund. So this is a fund that some units have, others do not. It covers the firefighters, the fire captains, the police patrol, those 3 units. And the employer contributes X dollars at the start of each year, and the employees do not contribute to it. And then the distributions to retirees is on an actuarially determined basis to make the fund fully funded at all times. So this fund is not going to be underfunded like the pension fund. Its distribution, if the performance isn't good, will go down the next time we have an actuarial evaluation. Because the funds are fairly small, Actuarial valuations are only done every 5 years. So that's the backstory on this fund. And we have employer contributions in the budget year with the orange next year, 37.3 for patrol, 27.5 for fire, and 70,100 for DPW. And then interest and earnings and dividends. You might see sergeants in there is dropping off. Sergeants is a closed plan and is now done because the last sergeant was paid off in October 2021. Total revenues, 258,009. And then each of the units that's paid has a department. So pension benefits going to police patrol is 106,002. And interestingly enough, the command unit joined the patrol's PHP fund. So this covers all of the unit members for both units now. And actuarial valuation, they're the ones who need to have a fresher up on their valuation. We have fiduciary insurance for a total cost in that department of $112,700. Trident, now, that label is wrong. It should be sergeants. That's the command unit that discontinued. Making myself a little note. So that's no longer active. Firefighters, we have pension benefits of $40,500 and insurance of $700. And the DPW, we have pension benefits of $158,100. Actuarial valuation, this is another one that needs to be refreshed at $5,400. And for total net appropriations of negative $60,500 with an ending fund balance of $4,049,200. These PHP funds are managed, each one by its own board. That includes 2 people from the unit, Mayor Gary, myself, and your liaison. So. Members of the board. Members of PHP board. Sorry, Brian Chapman. I was looking at the trust. Brian Chapman is in your place. That is the last page of our document. Thank you so much.
So that was a lot in a short amount of time. I know it's a lot of information to digest. I don't know if there's any questions.
Dumb this down for me. On the accounts that have depreciation, non-cash expense, like the water, sewer, does that just increase the value of the cash in the reserve account? Because there are a few accounts in here that have depreciation.
When I did the math to figure out the cash, I deducted the depreciation expense. So that purple line, I'm getting to it right here, 6,728,000. It is the previous year cash balance plus the net appropriations of a negative 1,200,000 plus the depreciation
Plus
expense.
depreciation, okay.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was another account, though, that I thought was, that had depreciation, too.
All the enterprise and internal service funds have it.
Okay.
So
Just
the
the individual
500s and
accounts, nothing
600s.
in the general fund, then, anywhere?
Nope.
Okay.
That'll be on the government-wide in your audit.
And then the police and fire pension, possible transfer to MERS. That won't change the structure of the board or any, they're just changing to MERS as their investment advisor? Is that what the structure would change?
The board would be eliminated. We would no longer need a board, a local board. We would still meet at the request of the units. They were interested in still watching over and supervising the activities to manage the fund. And we could meet, review the actuarial reports, and
Gotcha.
submit our comments, just as we could do under our general's MERS. And
So MERS assumes the function of the board with regard to paying out the retirees and everything else?
Yep.
And there was a desire from the units to have some local board capacity to review that. And I think it's great that they have a participation in it and reviewing that actuarial and, you know, providing feedback to it. And MERS was welcoming of that as well, and had no concerns about a local committee or a local board having some review of that, so.
In no way, shape, or form impacts the millage funding of that then?
So Kristen and I have a call with a pension attorney tomorrow, just to cover all of our bases before proceeding down this path, so.
But then you have no control of the funding, like MERS kind of raked up our rates a few years ago and tried to,
You're right. We would have less control.
less control.
We would have less local control. If the committee decided that they didn't like the, you know, the decision of the MERS actuaries or the investment performance, it would be a recommendation, but MERS could say, thank you very much, and not make any change. So that is one thing that would have to be accepted, that it would remove our local control over the pension.
And then the subsequent millage rate that we assess, we would have to just take MERS requirements
The,
for the cap?
the MERS attorneys, yes, we would. And MERS attorneys have weighed in on the viability of continuing to levy a millage, and said that is not impacted if this is a negotiated change. So each unit would have to agree to it. But right now, the pension board accepts our actuaries' recommended millage and dollar contribution from the employer. So there would be, in my viewpoint, no real change in that. I can't remember the last time that the actuaries suggested a change in our assumptions that was denied. And if MERS came up with one that we were uncomfortable with, city administration and this committee could meet with MERS and discuss it and try to work together toward a solution. There have been quite a few meetings that I've been at with MERS where I do see that happening. If a local is very uncomfortable with the changes and sees that in the actuarial evaluation, which they include projections, we could go to them and say, this is just not manageable. We're going to have to come up with some other solution. So it does happen out there. It's not been something we have done with either pension.
Is there any other questions?
You don't have a very big list.
I don't think we have anything on the hit and wish list, so if there's,
I have a question. How often do we examine contracted services? So, in other words, one that comes to mind is we contract services for our downtown plowing versus internally handling those matters.
so my department maintains a contract index, and, you know, what the term of it, what the cost of it is, and so that specific agreement was just bid out last year. So we look at those internally, do we have the equipment and the resources to take that on, compared to contracting it out. We did go out to bid, it came before the commission, it was awarded to the low bidder. So we do look at those as those come up before we determine if we're gonna bid it out or bring it in-house.
All right, is that the end of the presentation?
Yeah, so I would just say from my perspective, like Mayor Gary said, that the budget process, it takes months. It takes a lot of staff time. Department heads really work to manage their budgets, inputting this from, you know, their personnel and their user fees and their operations. And it's something that, you know, we stagger out and start in December. Kristen and Callie have been wonderful throughout the process. We go through our departmental meetings with each of the department heads, and we try to meet the needs of each of the departments so they can perform their operation. So I just want to thank the department heads for their work and working with us as we had to cut down this budget, and then Kristen and Callie for their support in the process and getting to this point, so.
No, great job. It's, yeah, never an easy process, but we certainly appreciate all the time and effort you put into it. And certainly didn't look like there were a lot of questions or hits from us, so thank you very much.
So with that, seeing there's no hit or wish items, that means next Monday's meeting will not be needed. So this budget will be back to the commission at the first meeting in May to schedule the public hearings, and those public hearings will be held at the second meeting in May to be approved by our timeline of June 1st.
Perfect. Any other questions, comments? Item C is matters presented by the public. Anybody in the audience have any comments, questions? Seeing none, any matters presented by the city commission? All right, so who would like to make the good
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. All in favor, say aye.